Welcome. You're listening to The Aligned Self, Conversations in Creating a Conscious and Abundant Life. This is Daniel Denovi. I'll be your guide and host. Let's see just where we can take this. Hello, friend, and welcome back to the conversation. Last week, I talked about NLP, my introduction to neuro-linguistic programming, and how it changed my awareness level, my self-awareness, and my awareness of others. I'll go deeper into that conversation, but I did promise that I would do a standalone episode on self-awareness. Now, I'm only going to scratch the surface here because I cannot do the whole topic of self-awareness or awareness in general any justice inside a single podcast episode. So what I'm going to leave you with today are a series of questions, and I'm not even going to attempt to quantify them at this point in the conversation because I've written down several, and I'm going to probably mishmash a bunch together and talk about them as variations on a theme and yada, yada, yada. So I'm not going to define or limit myself at this moment. Some of this is going to flow, and some of this has been predetermined, so we'll just see what comes out in the wash. Now, if you're new to this conversation, if you're new to me, you don't necessarily know where I'm coming from. I've been a coach for over 30 years. I've been on the spiritual path or my own spiritual journey ever since I was 8 years old. I'm now 64-ish, something like that. I always have to think about what year I was born and then figure it out. So it's always an approximation. Now, that's going to serve us as in one of our later questions. But I've been in this play of consciousness on this journey of self-discovery, of pushing the boundaries of my own potential, just what's possible for my life, what's possible for me as a person. And there's been layers and layers of questions. And so I've had to think back. What were some of the first questions I began asking myself that really opened up my self-awareness, my awareness of how I was interacting with reality? And so that's what you're going to get today. So this first question is one that was really not easy for me to answer, at least not at first, because I had no idea just how much of my experience or my emotions that I had been dissociating from, that I wasn't really present to, that I wasn't aware of, that I was also kind of pushing down because some of the feelings weren't very comfortable. They were downright uncomfortable, in fact. And because they were uncomfortable, I shied away from actually being present to them. So the first question I want you to ask yourself on a regular basis, and you might even, put this in a timer on your telephone and your personal device, and to have it remind you to ask this question. And the question is this: what am I feeling? What am I feeling right now? And this is the way my coach used to present it to me. My coach, Marilyn, she's just wonderful. She would ask me, what are you present to? And that I would always be dumbfounded when she would ask me that, because I would be deep in thought, deep in my unconscious mind, and she would say, what are you present to? And the first thing that I would say was like nothing. But she would press me, what are you present to? What are you aware of? What new ideas come up? What questions do you have? What does this? So I started diving deeper on just about every thought that I had. When I was introduced to a new idea, what am I present to? Does this open up possibility, or does it limit possibility? And we'll revisit that question down the road. But first question is, what are you feeling? What do you feel? And an auxiliary question to this is, what want or need are you attempting to fulfill on, or what want or need is going unfulfilled? For instance, you're in conversation with someone and the intensity of the emotion is high and you start to feel angry. So let's say you feel angry. That's what I feel. Then you dive deeper. What is the want or need that is going unfulfilled? Anger is frustration and anger is fear. And typically it's the idea that a want or need will go unfulfilled. So in the face of this example, let's say there's anger popping up and we start looking, what is the want or need that is unfulfilled? And that might be recognition, or the feeling that you're being listened to, or that your feelings are being acknowledged. And because they don't seem to be acknowledged, you have an angry response, and it just seems to be escalating the more the other person tries to talk or gets their point across or prove you wrong. And again, underneath the surface, what's underneath the surface? What is the essence of this conversation? What's going on down below in the so-called unconscious mind, down in the cellar? This is a buried and probably unmet want or need from your childhood. And this is probably another good question to ask. As you tune into an emotion, and it could be unpleasant, if it's a mucky muck feeling, it takes some courage to actually be with it. And that's all you want to do. You just want to be with it. You want to experience and dive a little deeper. A lot of times we feel these feelings, these unpleasant feelings, these uncomfortable feelings, and we go right. We go off the other direction. We don't actually want to be over there on the left and be with that emotion. So you want to be gentle with yourself. You want to acknowledge and commit to your own discovery. Actually be in the idea that this emotion is coming up for a reason, usually a train of thought, but it's coming up for a reason. You want to dive deeper. You want to get to the source of it. And so one of the questions you might ask, if it's in response to a particular situation, you might ask, what am I making this situation, this response, mean about me? What am I making it mean about me? What's the story about this? For instance, in an earlier episode, I alluded to the idea that when my wife would occasionally interrupt me, I would perceive it as being interrupted. And what I made that mean about me is that what I had to say was unimportant. She wasn't willing to acknowledge my feelings. So I had this whole story. And we do that. We have a whole story, what you make this mean, what that action means about you. And it's not necessarily true. Once I began looking at it, what is it like for her to be with me? Well, she wasn't feeling acknowledged. And so she felt like she had to talk over me to get her point across, so she would have the feeling of being heard. Now, when both people are in this space, and wanting to be heard and wanting to be taken at value, that what they have to say or what they think they have to offer is the right answer, it's not never ending. And so one of you has to take on the role of being the communicator. And since you're taking on the role of increased personal awareness, you are the one to listen first. So once you open up and listen to her, acknowledge her or not acknowledge your partner or the other person in the conversation, acknowledge them. Listen to what they have to say without the need to respond. You just want to understand. Now, that's something Stephen Covey said inside the 7 Habits. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. See, when the other person feels understood, that there's a platform of understanding or a wanting to be understood, then they're more willing to give you the latitude when it's your time to talk. But I said all that to come to that question, what am I making this mean about me? We can take actions of other people, we can take a scenario, a circumstance, and we'll make that mean something about us without ever digging deeper, without ever asking a deeper question. And so in addition to what am I making this mean, an additional question to improve your self-awareness is, am I making a story up about this? One way to ascertain whether or not you're making a story is, do the facts naturally lead to that, or are you making a conclusion based on the available information? Another scenario that this could apply to is, lately I've been thinking about auditioning, whether you're an actor, a musician, or like you're auditioning for a part and there's a select number of spots available. And so you don't get the job. You're passed over. What do you make that mean about you? That you're no good, that you'll never be any good at this, you'll never have any work. There's a story there. And a lot of times we compare ourselves to other people. Where, am I comparing myself to somebody else, some external standard? Maybe they had a specific idea or criteria about what they wanted, and you just didn't fit it. That's it. For that one single job, you didn't fit what they were looking for. And then you can go on to the next one, and it's just a series of auditions. It's just a series of next steps until you get the job. You'll find the right mix, the right connection. and it's just a matter of time. See, these are all stories that we make this mean. There's no such thing as failure, only feedback. Now, that's a way to release you from failure, release you from the story. A lot of people don't make the grade in one area or another, and they make that mean that they're just not good enough. They'll never make it. No one will ever love them. See, that's just a story. It's not the truth. You can tell the story any way you want. And so this awareness, this question, self-reflection, what am I making this mean about me? That brings up another question of self-reflection. Am I reacting from the past? Am I reacting to the situation, or am I proactive? Am I actually present to what's going on in this moment, or am I calling up some emotional response from my past? And you can discover that just by looking at how prevalent is this response. Is this a predictable response given the situation? Could anyone in your family or your close friends or your significant other predicted that response? Chances are you are reacting from the past. It's just a habitual pattern that you're repeating again and again. And this is where you bring the unconscious into conscious awareness. Once you recognize, oh, this is a pattern from my past. This comes from my childhood. Once you know where it's coming from, insight does not change it. Just knowing does not really assist you. But it gives you the opportunity to choose it or release it. A lot of people say this happened to me in childhood, so it's understandable why I keep repeating it again and again. It's how I was programmed. It's how I was treated. But you're surrendering leadership to an unconscious process, or a process that was once unconscious, and you're saying that you're not responsible. But now that you're conscious of it, now that you're aware of it, do you choose it? Do you want to perpetuate it? And you can make a choice. Now, you can ask yourself, do I feel as if I have the power to drop something that doesn't work for me? Or am I a slave to my past? Again, are you playing a victim, or are you the victor in your life? And that brings up another question, a powerful question that I wasn't thinking of at first, but since it's come to the forefront of my mind. And that is the question, am I surrendering leadership of my mind, of my responses, to outside circumstance? Am I surrendering leadership of my mind, sovereignty of my being? Am I giving that up for the needs and wants of someone else? And that usually brings me to the question, am I playing the victim here? Or if I was to take proactive control, what would be or could be my response? Which, as I think about it, brings up another question. Am I blaming someone for the result of this, or am I at cause? Am I looking at how I've been creative in this, how I created this whole situation, or how I'm contributing to the problem, contributing to the drama, contributing to the circumstance? What is my role? Because a lot of people like to take a hands-off approach here. Like you're in the driver's seat and you take your hands off, let somebody else steer. No, you're in the driver's seat, so you need to take control of what you can control. The way you hear this expressed out in the marketplace is, it's not my job, it's not my domain, it's not my responsibility. Well, if it were your responsibility, what would be your response? I take on the role that I can find out, I can get the answer. If someone hands me a problem, I accept it as mine, which has been to my disservice from time to time, but by and large, it allows me to go the extra mile. But I only typically do that is because the other person is not taking responsibility for their own actions. They're not taking responsibility for their own results. And that's another question. Where am I giving up responsibility? Where am I not being responsibled in this situation? For instance, I was talking to a guy who said, I've been unemployed for 2 years, 24 months, but nobody's hiring. And in my mind, I'm hearing nobody's hiring. See, I know people die and leave their positions all the time. Now, some people do die, but they continue to go to the job and no one's wiser, no one really knows. But there's always positions opening. And If you're brilliant, if you really take responsibility, you could create a position, you could fulfill a need. But again, he was waiting for the right opportunity. So I had to ask, how are you limiting your opportunities? How specific does the job offering have to be before you say yes? Is the limitation based on income? Is it based on availability, location? Are there things you're not willing to do? Again, where are you being responsible in this, and where are you being the victim? Who are you blaming? You're blaming everybody else. Nobody else is hiring. Nobody is hiring. Are you sure? The next question is closely aligned with this, and that is the idea of your capabilities or your capacity. How much can you make? How much can you do? That's a limitation that you create. Where did you get this idea? What limits are you placing on your capabilities? Now, sometimes we look to other people and we look at the competition and we don't think we stack up. More often than not, when we compare ourselves to others, we overestimate another person's capabilities or abilities, and we underestimate our own. Now, psychologists have said that most people tend to overestimate their abilities when setting off on a goal. I've not necessarily found that true across the board, but it does play in. Now, you could ask yourself, where am I overestimating my capabilities? If you want to start a business, are there things that you don't know that you're assuming that you know or can do? Have you taken an assessment of your strengths and your weaknesses? And if you don't know for sure, or an answer is not coming to mind, you can ask this question. Let's say that you proceed, and 2 years down the road, you fail miserably. What might have been the problem? And if you're working in committee, you can ask other people. Let's say this organization fails. It flounders within 2 years or 3 years. What are the contributing factors of that failure? And even though you don't know consciously, other than consciously, more than likely, you can identify the potential problems and pitfalls. Unconsciously, you already know. And this is part of this self-reflection. We want to bring the unconscious into conscious awareness. Then we can choose it. But I've used that question, if things were to fail 2 years down the road, what would be the contributing factors? I've used that to identify my own weaknesses. I either have to bring someone in or I have to acquire a new skill. Now, one limitation to my capabilities was actually given by an unconscious acceptance of an old story. And one of the ways that I gained access to this is asking the question, how old am I acting? And I want you to ask yourself, to what degree does my age factor into what I'm allowing myself to do or not allow myself to do? What story do I have around the age that I am or the age that I'm becoming? Now, with considerations to age, there's chronological age. There's the number of years we've been on the planet. That doesn't really matter. There's our emotional age, which for a lot of people, you're still in your teens. You're reacting as a teenager to frustrations and anger and all that stuff. And that needs to be remedied. But that's a question. What is my emotional age? What is my emotional maturity? Now, sometimes to gather this information, you need to ask this question. What is it like for other people to be with me? To be in an argument with me, to be in discussion with me? What is my typical emotional response, and how long has this response been in my repertoire? But to recap quickly, there's your chronological age, there's your emotional age, your physical age. Now, I've been in the process of reversing my physical age, and I'm making progress. I'm getting younger all the time. Thank you very much. And then there's the limitations in our thinking. What is not possible given my age? What if I didn't know how old I was? How old would I be? If I were 20 years younger, would my response be any different than it is today? If I was 30 years older and had that wisdom, would my response be any different? Am I acting young? Am I acting as if I'm not responsible for my life? You see, I define emotional maturity as making choices for your life on how you're going to feel independent of your programming, independent of how you're brought up. independent of your past experiences. It's being able to choose your response in this given moment. And I'm going to do a whole podcast episode on that because most people are unconscious, just reacting out of their past. That's the question that I brought up earlier. Am I reacting? Am I reacting from the past, or am I proactive or present in this moment? But that deserves a whole nother conversation. Now, I did talk about physical age, and that's an entire conversation on tuning into your body, tuning into what you bring in, your food, your energy level, sexuality. All these different aspects are part of your self-awareness, and that's another conversation. But before I leave you in this episode, I have a couple more questions, a couple more points to make. Now, this was an area that I had a lot of difficulty in the first quarter of my life. And that was I was giving up my power to other people for the sake of their validation, to get their applause, to get their good approval, to get their good esteem of me. So I would bend my behavior in order to fit how I thought they wanted me to be. And so the question I ask is, how dependent am I upon the validation of other people? Am I willing to lose it? Am I willing to not get that validation to be true to myself? And then, if I'm not, what would it mean about me if they did not validate me? And then, would that be true? Because a lot of times we make these assumptions that if we don't get the validation, if we don't get the love from somebody else, then that means we're not lovable enough, or we're not enough, we're just not plain enough. Which, there's a question, self-reflection, not enough what? Not enough what? What's missing? And then, is that true? And so that question is, how dependent am I on that validation? And I found myself that it was orienting all my behavior, all my choices in relationships, especially, probably more so into my 40s even, to get that validation, that external validation, that I was lovable, that I was okay, that I was all right. Hey, you're kind of special. I like you. I was looking for that. And a lot of times I would put myself in situations to not get it, or they would present it in the beginning and then they would take it away. My lesson is I needed to be the one to provide that for me. The source of my validation needed to come from within. Not that I was totally oblivious to external validation. That was, frosting on the cake. But I had to bake my own cake before anybody else could put frosting on it. Because ultimately, if I'm not right inside, if I got mud going on here and someone else puts frosting on it, it might look like a good cake, but inside, it just doesn't taste. It just doesn't sustain. And that's where I was at. No matter what someone else would present to me, because I didn't completely love and validate myself, then they were always lacking. No matter how much they did, no matter what they did, they would always come up short because I was already creating myself as lacking or short in that capacity. It was at a workshop with Carolyn Mays that she asked this question, and it revealed an aspect to me that I didn't like looking at. She asked, in what capacity am I showing up as a prostitute? An archetypal prostitute, where I'm selling myself out for money, for acceptance, for a position, for something external. I will sell my authenticity out. I'll sell my sovereignty out. I'll sell my values out in order to get accepted. And I have to admit, once I answered that question, I didn't like myself. I was looking at all the behavior, and I made myself wrong. Now, in all these questions, if you come up with an answer you're not necessarily particularly proud of, don't make yourself wrong. What you say is, isn't that interesting? Isn't that fascinating that behavior is in place? It's fulfilling a need. It's fulfilling a want somewhere. And so I just realized that I needed to commit to myself first. And so I asked myself this question: what would my behavior be if I was totally committed to myself? Would I be in this relationship if I was totally committed to myself, my own happiness? Was I pretending to be happy to keep the relationship going, to make it work, so they wouldn't think I was a bad guy to leave? If you are committed to yourself, would you stay in this situation? Would you start this relationship? Would you go to this job or, begin this job? How long would you stay in this job? Sometimes you have to pay the bills and make things work. Doesn't mean you can't keep looking. It's in the meantime. But ultimately, are you committed to this? If you were committed to yourself, would this be acceptable? If you made a standard for yourself that your happiness was paramount, because ultimately you are the person you're with, have to live with, be with 24/7, 365, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You cannot get away from yourself. So it is incumbent upon you to be your own best friend, to commit to yourself. Because if you're not committed to yourself, nobody else will be in your life. Not for the long term. Okay, that was my short list of questions to ask yourself for increased self-awareness. Now, part of me was thinking erroneously that I would have given you a point-by-point list. Question 1, question 2, question 3, and it's kind of circular, and some of the questions are nested in other questions, and that's the nature of self-discovery. You just start peeling away the layers and peeling away the layers, and again, you never make yourself wrong. Like, you can admonish behavior, but ultimately the intention was well-suited. You just had maybe not the best approach. And when you see an approach or a behavior that is less than admirable to you, you just say, isn't that interesting? Isn't that fascinating? What new behavior could I put in place instead of that old one? What new story could I tell? If the only question you ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? What am I present to? It's going to open up so many things in your life. But don't stop there. Don't just stop with what am I feeling. A lot of people, especially women, have an easy time identifying what they're feeling. But you ask yourself, what need or want am I attempting to fulfill on, or what want or need is going unfulfilled that has me arriving at this feeling? Now, notice I didn't say, why are you feeling this? What want or need? How are you thinking that has you arrive at this feeling? What are you making this mean about you? When we ask the question why, it is the most unproductive question overall of any of the questions that we can ask. Because 9 times out of 10, the only thing that we get with asking a why question is a story that explains why. Never takes us anywhere, never gives us any valuable information. Occasionally it does, but more often than not, we want to find out, how is this working for you? Because this behavior would not be persistent, would not keep showing up if it wasn't valuable to you, if it didn't serve you in some way. You can have the reason why it's showing up, but when we ask, how is this serving you, we actually arrive at an answer. And once we know how this is serving you, if we don't like that behavior, we can actually create some new behaviors to arrive at that want or need just a lot more elegantly. The other thing I want to qualify here is that this is not to arrive at a knowing of all your weaknesses. It's identifying your weaknesses. It's knowing where your strengths are, because you ultimately want to know yourself. And if it's a strength that's important and you need to acquire a new skill or hire someone, that is power. That gives you an option. So, my friend, this is definitely not the last conversation we're going to have on self-awareness. Now, I've had episodes where we've talked about self-awareness in various capacities all along. We're on 380 something, 800, I don't know, almost 400 episodes. And we've broached this subject before. But I promise I'm going to dive deeper. Actually, I was listing all the different levels of awareness that we could have, and I decided there's probably a book here. Definitely a course. There's a lot more conversations we can have, because there's not only self-awareness, there's situational awareness, emotional awareness, there's body and health awareness, there's awareness of others and nonverbal cues and nonverbal communication. There are several levels, multiple levels of awareness. Just start where you are. Start in your own backyard. Start with your own self-awareness And when you know how you're thinking about something, and we haven't yet touched upon how you're contaminating your information, that's another episode. But for now, we just want to tune in to what's currently going on. Am I operating out of the past? Am I in the present moment? Who am I? Who am I choosing to be for the world? Well, until next time, this is your friend and host, Daniel D'Novi, urging you to follow your bliss. Live your life from inner signals, be inner directed as you engage in the epic adventure.